Now I would like to mention what is the purpose of using this concept, emptiness or shunya. Now the Buddhist way, I think basically all major religious tradition they agree killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, these things are universally considered negative, harmful. But then how to stop, how to reduce these harmful actions? The harmful action or any action is a come out of motivation. Some action, most cases neutral action without motivation, but automatically it come. But more serious action all come from motivation. So now in order to tackle these harmful action and also the positive action, the important thing is we have to deal with the motivation. Now, in order to develop useful action, we try to cultivate compassion or altruism, and then further develop altruism. Then in order to deal with negative action, try to minimize, eventually try to eliminate the negative action, you have to deal with motivation. So now, negative action or harmful action, I think ultimately it's two set or two kinds of two categories or two kinds of motivation. One aspect is self-centered motivation. For that, altruism is the countermeasure of extreme self-centered motivation. Then another thing, like anger, attachment, too much pride, and kind of jealousy, these motivation, although each destructive emotion, there are countermeasure, counter opposite. Right. Counter force. Now, anger, counter force, loving kindness. Attachment, counter force, I think
meditating on the ugly nature of other things.
And also I think content, also some extent countermeasure for greed, for attachment. Pride, too much pride, arrogance, right? Arrogance, the countermeasure, humbleness, think more one's own mystic side. These are countermeasure. Now, according to Buddhism, particularly according to Madhyamika, now all these destructive emotion, or what do you call it? Kalesh. That's a common word. The Hinduism or ancient non-Buddhist tradition also, you see, they're very much concerned or deal with emotions. So samadhi, one measure, one method to deal with kalesh. Then vipassana, the samadhi Vipassana is common, Buddhism and ancient non-Buddhist tradition. So the according Madhyamika philosophy, all these destructive emotion, which call kalesh, all these destructive emotion is actually very much influenced by ignorance. Ignorance, there are different levels of ignorance, but fundamental ignorance. Nadina, Tashuk, Nagarjuna's one quotation. Lada nyumo sebe tar, taba sebe, lada nyumo, ta nyumo se, and it le sap soya matter. Le nibo certain jimmy, the legig nigga de tabaris. That digi taba can just talk towards Lona, taba toward the gaping in this pneumonies. Pneumonia, Chimiji Nandori, Gari. Chimiji Nando said, Carson, Drodashi, Drondog, that Drondog Zit. That Drondog Ziggy, Droda. Teledene, Pneumonia. So that the terrible degree, you simply remember the leggings, this will do. Long lang kadula, any long lang say you de chasing to midugush law shy we are the managana namdog. There's a good stuff of Jodasha. This is cheaper than it's mission namdog Jodasha.
Next is as to how the afflictive emotions or the klesh they come into being. It is said by Nagarjuna that the cessation, in Nagarjuna's text, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way. The fundamental wisdom of the middle way. In it, he says that all afflictive emotions and their respective karmas, when they come to cease, that is the liberation, that is nirvana. And then he further says that, and yet these afflictive emotions and their respective karmas, they come into being by virtue of exaggerating conceptual thoughts or exaggerating thoughts. So here, by these two lines, Nagarjuna, what he meant to say says that when one is able to eliminate afflictive emotions or klesh, then what happens is that there is no more of accumulating any more karma first, and secondly, the already existing karmas that we have, if there isn't the afflictive emotions, then these karmas will not have any other agent to nourish these karmas to give rise to the next birth. So, because of the elimination of afflictive emotions, the new karmas will not be accumulated, and the already existing karma will not function because there is no catalyst, there is no agent which enhances or nurtures these karmas to give rise to the samsara. And then another question is, if it is by virtue of eliminating the afflictive emotions or the klesh that one achieves liberation, then what gives rise to these afflictive emotions? Then it says that these afflictive emotions or the disturbing emotions, they are given rise to by exaggerating thoughts, which means that if you see something as beautiful or if you see something as repulsive, something totally disagreeable to your thought, then what exactly is happening is that you exaggerate a quality of repulsion over there, and then because of that, then you tend to arouse sense of anger, aversion, and so forth. In fact, I met one psychotherapist who said that when somebody arises in him or her anger, so there that person is viewing other object as very in the light of ugliness, in the light of repulsive nature. So what is actually happening is that out of the 100%, 90% of the characteristics of repulsion, they are simply being imputed, simply being exaggerated by one's own anger, by one's own thought. So what he said, the psychotherapist, what he said, and what is presented in Buddhist teachings, so these two tally exactly the same.
Now, usually I make one example. Now, for example, watch or apple. Nowadays, I heard yesterday, a good apple come from China, isn't it? Different fruits. So you see, like you said, one good fruit. On the market, yes, at the beginning, you feel, yes, it's good. But then, on cow or ox is a big one that come, and that is fell down, you may feel, oh, so bad. That's all. But after you bought, and in it back, if something even close to touch, you feel, oh. Because same sort of, same material, before still not develop mind. Then later, you see, now because of feeling of mind, now that become more precious. But same object. Now here is very clear, the mentally, sort of the once you see owned by oneself and pay certain amount of money. So then you see, now you develop now much sort of closeness, attach. So similarly, I think two couples, or two brothers, or two sisters, is a fight due to something. It's a fight. During the moment, it's anger, they are angry and fighting. They it appears is something quite negative. So you really want to hit, and you want to or divorce, or you want to separate. But then that anger, you see, gone. Then there's a different person now. Looks, appears something different, more normal, isn't it? Like that. So the anger, negative emotion, really creates false impression. So unrealistic. The anger or negative emotion, then hidden, right?
It obscures
the reality. So all the negative emotion, they very much based on this fundamental, ignorance, fundamental ignorance. Now, what is fundamental ignorance? I think the fundamental ignorance. That fundamental ignorance, fundamental ignorance consists of Jumda Rana Kasat Lasarima, Dharma, Sherima, Dharma, so Dharma, Kodere, Shesheva, deep don't the Zinding at the Sheva.
So here, from Buddhist perspective, there are four schools of thought, and all four schools of thought, they posit their own version of the fundamental ignorance. And then, what is this fundamental ignorance then? So all this, as said earlier, all these four different schools of thought, they have their own version of the selflessness, the concept of selflessness. So then that distorted thought, distorted mind, which perceives the opposite of this selflessness, becomes the fundamental ignorance, according to the version of one's own school.
So, according to Madhyamika, that you Ramune, Jubata, Nangshin, now the Zibati, fundamental ignorance.
And then, in particular, from the point of view of the middle way school of thought, Madhyamika, things appear when you have the perception of things. They appear as though they have intrinsic, inherent, or independent existence. And then, just as they appear to exist independently, if you really cling to it, if you believe that, oh, these things truly exist so independently as they appear, then that becomes the fundamental ignorance, according to the middle way school of thought.
So, the understanding, absence of that kind of independent existence. Now that actually the reality, ultimate reality, we call shunya. Absence, just a mere absence of independent existence. That is shunya. So now the concept of mind which understands the absence of independent existence, now that very thought is the counterforce of the other grasping.
Self-grasping, or the grasping at inherent or independent existence.
I think like external things, in order to change, not by naturally, momentarily changing, not that way, but it's some big change. You see, you need big change happen because of counter forces, you see, develop. For example, now heat, warm here, then air condition, the coldness increase, the warm heat decrease. Heat increase, the coldness decrease. So that dungi gyanda.
So these two, the heat and the cold, these two are contradictory in ways of, in the context of continuation. As the continuation of one increases, the continuation of the other ceases.
And likewise, light and dark. As soon as light come, dark gone. Light gone, dark come. So cannot remain together. So now attachment is considered, this is good, this is beautiful. Anger, consider that's bad, want to get rid of. Other, good, want to
want to have it.
So different contradictory sort of attitude of the mind. So similarly, the fundamental ignorance, now according to Madhyamika, is the grasp or the grasping the independent existence. That's opposition is absence, no independent existence. These two minds are contradictory. So the countermeasure of that fundamental ignorance is the wisdom which understands shunya. In other words, the fundamental ignorance is the mistakenly, grasping, mistakenly the ultimate reality.
The mistaken mind which mistakes or which obscures the reality.
So that's ignorance. Because
now if we explore as to why this ignorance, this self-grasping mind is mistaken or distorted, it's because the very object as apprehended by this ignorance does not truly exist there as apprehended. As such, since that the object as apprehended by this ignorance does not exist, we can clearly say that this ignorance is a mistaken mind or a distorted mind. It has no valid basis or the sound basis in terms of valid cognition, valid mind.
So when that is a mistake mind or concept of
The
mistake mind is developed, very forceful, but if you further investigate, then it becomes weaker, because no solid basis. It's unrealistic. The other, the realization of emptiness or non-existence of that kind of nature, that's the realistic. That view,
and whereas here, this wisdom, which understands the absence of independent existence, so here, the more you try to explore into its object, then we see that things, they truly exist the way this, the wisdom apprehends or views the things to exist.
So therefore, now the concept of shunya is actually the building up the countermeasure of the fundamental ignorance. And through that way, once the fundamental ignorance reduced, then all the rest of the negative emotion, destructive emotion, then their intensity will reduce. So, the complicated philosophy is necessary to understand. If that's just merely intellectual thing, then on practical level, not necessarily to learn. But this is something very important in our daily life. These negative emotions will not go through prayer, through just wish. No, these emotions are so powerful. Now, how to eliminate or how to reduce these negative emotions is try to know these negative emotions are baseless. No sound basis. Now, only through that way, the strength of these negative emotions reduce. I think one example, I think our anger. Usually, you see the anger to humanity, I think sometimes you may express, oh, how bad humanity. But I think real, very heartfelt sort of strong anger, you cannot. Because so vast. Then I think the anger to all Indian, that's also difficult. Now one individual, Gupta, like that, one individual Indian, Gupta. Yes, now independent target there, so our anger can develop. Oh, this is bad, how bad this Mr. Gupta. I want to eliminate, isn't it? Now that anger, because the anger need particular, precise target. As soon as you see that bad Gupta, now because you see his I think Gupta main name, isn't it? Then I should include some female. so you see, she or he, you see, that moment, you see, they're very negative. Then moment, if you see, second thought, oh, his or her bad behavior happened because of due to that. Then the anger now gradually losing independent target. Isn't it? So that's the way the dealing with negative emotion. So therefore, I usually describe Buddhist way of practice is use our intelligence maximum way, through that way transform our negative emotion. That's the way, not through prayer. Now, so-called meditation. Meditation, two kinds. Both the two kinds. One, single-pointed meditation. Another, analytical meditation. Now the process. Process. Firstly, analytical meditation. Without that, there is no basis of single-pointed meditation. Firstly, you see, analyze. Even the altruistic mind. Meditate on altruistic mind. Firstly, you see, you have to think. You have to investigate what is the use, right, of altruistic mind. What is the usefulness? What is value? If I practice that, what I will gain? If nothing to gain, then waste of time. So you investigate what is the value. Then once you find altruistic attitude is something very good to myself, to other, finally myself, is an immense benefit. Once you develop that kind of conviction, then through the single-pointed meditation, it can be. So both single-pointed meditation and analytical meditation, both are familiarizing. So our mind, now for example, I think when we start ABCD or kakakanga like that, at the beginning, sometimes it's difficult. You have to remind. Then eventually, once you learned, then
obvious.
No difficulties. At the beginning, you may feel the tanya pata A, B, C, individually A's, individually B's pata now.
At first, when you first learn these different alphabets like A, B, C, the first kind of experience that you would have is that as though you are deliberately designating, this kind of the format, a kind of letter should be pronounced as A. That way, you should always be recalled of this fact.
Then gradually familiarize. Then, as soon as ABC you saw, the A come from there, A, B, like that. So that's as a result of familiarization. Familiarity.
No.
So that's the way to change our mind, to change our emotion. So, so that's the process.
No. So this is the procedure as to how to meditate, how to utilize these two forms of meditation, single-pointed, first analytical and then single-pointed meditation. And then, if you look at the text, after the first verse, where it reads, just as the blessed Buddhas and the great Bodhisattvas and so forth, the prose side. So this explains the conventional bodhicitta, explains the altruistic intention to become Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings.
That is what the share shung the girl, and the love rangaman, Javakian, that she
So in fact, the first verse and the next passage, these two are in fact the very source on the basis of which Nagarjuna is going to give further interpretations and expositions. And then, if you read through the first the stanza marked number 1, bowing to the glorious virtue holder who embodies the awakening mind. I shall explain here the meditative practice of awakening mind that destroys cyclic existence. So here, from there onwards, it is the Nagarjuna's own composition, saying the words of salutation, and also saying the words of making the promise for the composition.
다 디슈의 측제 주구되다 디 전다 님부 뒤셔다 측제들이 사제남이 정주선 단담 정주선 제 단담 정주선 아니 다도 다와다 다가는 신기 풍소 최다도 좀보다 다가는 신기 아니 넘리기 똑바사되기 숭진 니동기 셰바 딘루기 다 다와 디디기 디디다 가서 그게 매 뒤제 캄다 매베 캬벌레 디디 판도 연구제디 이내다 터두기 셰바온 셰바인 디디 논주지 근데 인도 똑받는지 뭐지 봐스 다 다와 터두 가르스는 다도 동니 천이시 자디 아니 민대 샥성심마도 랑 원이 주베 또 제부 뭐 탐제 원이 주베 또레스 인터뷰다 동니테 단담 전주고 생기 미버 추가배바디 미버 데레스 동니 참모드레스 데네 인터뷰 동니 참모 네베 아니 로티니 닝지 렘베 셈기 닝지 렘베 고조 상주지 셈 대 스버 주운도 아니 단담 상주고 셈사 디차브레스 아니 단담 상주고 셈 낭세기 고네 고도 캐슈버 아니 림베 용구레스 와다 대달 아니 동니가 따와다 아니 상주지 셈 대니 냠린치하게 닝부디 데레 송다.
Next, if you read stanza 2.
The Buddhists maintain the awakened mind to be not obscured by such conceptions as consciousness of self, aggregates, and so on. It is always characterized by emptiness. It is with a mind moistened by compassion that you must cultivate awakening mind with effort. The Buddhists who embody great compassion constantly develop this awakening mind. These two stanzas, in fact, are the essences of this whole chapter. The explanation is that the Buddhists maintain the awakening mind. Here, this awakening mind refers to the ultimate bodhicitta, the very mind which understands non-dualistically emptiness and associated by the conventional bodhicitta. And then it says, the Buddhists maintain the awakening mind to be not obscured by such conceptions as consciousness of self. In fact, according to His Holiness's commentary, it should be retranslated, the third line, obscured by such conceptions as self, aggregates, and the mere mind. So this should be the interpretation. What is being said here is that in order for to
가서 고름지 시야서. 어디들?
So here, the kind of the ultimate bodhicitta should be characterized by the object in terms of the emptiness, and it should not. That kind of understanding should not be obscured by grasping at self. So first here, the self, consciousness of self, should not be obscured by grasping at self. And second, should not be obscured by grasping at the self-nature of phenomena, aggregates referring to phenomena, grasping at the self-nature of the phenomena. And then the third should be instead of consciousness first, it should be the consciousness or the mind. Because that the Chitta Masters or the mindfulness school, although they posit the concept of selflessness, of the absence of external reality, no external reality, but they cling so strongly to the existence of the mind to be so independent and truly. As such, it says that the understanding of emptiness should not be sullied or should not be obscured by grasping at the true existence of the mind. So that way, although these different understandings of the different kinds of views may have some benefit to some people of different propensities, but overall, in order to gain a genuine understanding of the ultimate bodhicitta, one should not be sullied or one should not be polluted by these different views. And then now, what should be the proper understanding of emptiness, which characterizes the ultimate bodhicitta, should be the understanding that everything is merely designated. There is no inherent or there is no objective independent existence. Everything comes into being by virtue of mere designation, mere thought. So if one understands this, the emptiness of independent existence, that should be the object of the ultimate bodhicitta. And then stanza 3, it is with the mind moistened by compassion that you must cultivate awakening mind with effort. Here, cultivate awakening mind. This word, awakening mind, in this context, is the awakening mind or the bodhicitta in the context of conventional bodhicitta, not the ultimate. The bodhicitta which desires to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. And then, when one is able to cultivate such a bodhicitta, such an altruistic intention, and then if one focuses on ultimate reality, one can generate the ultimate bodhicitta, the mind which is focused on, non-dualistically focused on emptiness. And then depending on the degree of understanding, one can be allocated to the different levels of the realizations. The Buddhists who embody great compassion constantly develop this awakening mind.
So these two, altruism, or usually I call infinite altruism, with help of the wisdom which understands shunya. These two is, me personally also, my daily main practice is these two. From early morning, I try to think these two things and try to get some kind of influence which remain rest of the day. So that's my main practice. Of course, in daily, about 4 hours, some form of practice. That means some meditation, some chanting, or some recitation. But some, I feel almost like a burden, not much interest. but once I received some initiation, some teaching, then you have to kasada.
These are commitments. These are commitments.
Commitments. But these two things, I deliberately try to cultivate it daily, on daily basis. So that really makes, a freshness in my mind. Obviously, altruism, think more about altruism, then it really makes some kind of real freshness and some kind of inner strength. Now, for example, when I develop some kind of little discourage or sadness or hopelessness, then think about altruism and our commitment that I think clearly expressed in Shantadeva's book. There was one shloka that is, so long space remain. so long sentient beings suffering remain, I will remain in order to serve. So that shloka, when I feel a little sad, hopelessness, that kind of feeling, recite that and think that, then immediately is a change. Because the short temporary problems or causing sadness, nothing. Compare eons or till space remain, I will remain. So these are then really is worthless, right? Worthless to be serious, right? Like that is very, very helpful. So as a result of practice of altruism, the immediate result you can experience. Now as a result of practice of shunya understanding, not that way, but gradually, in some cases through invisible way, unnoticeable way, some change. That's something like some gradual strengthening or increasing the immune system, something like that, in order to counter all those negative emotions. Of course, still, I myself, as a student of Nagarjuna's philosophy, I have no such experience of fully understanding about shunya. Usually I describe, now I could smell shunya. And with help of that little sort of understanding, they're really helpful, you see, to see possibility of moksha, possibility of cessation. So, immense benefit. So then, through that way, some genuine faith or respect, admiration towards Buddha and Nagarjuna, all these, then automatically come. So very useful. 다 드라마 무디 전지 강다고에 서 드라마 그사다 풍불이 된 셈에 다 거야 진짜.
And then from stanza 4.
그 풍불이 된 셈에 다 거에 계셔.
From the stanza 4 onwards, which reads, the self postulated by the extremists and so forth, the detailed explanation about rejecting a self which is eternal, unitary, and independent as proposed by the non-Buddhist schools of thought.
다디 신마 다 부이들만 전에 도저 남배선 디신신은 디모시 강의 도저 전에 청주 예마인 다디 수데 디즈문되게 세님이지 교함이 유주로만 나람체 니선 이제 뭐시다 어다 책 들으면 다 우마베다 동이 참치 거래 세님이지 교함이 가라다 되기 동이 참치 디 캐주 맞송 수데 디시처럼 군지 시스 도와 디슈다 디슈는 군지 캐주만 또 체중만이 체주 당고디 똥번이 있어야 돼. 콘데 참지기 싫어했어. 뒤주는 군지 싫어. 똥번이 돼. 저바 타다 쉬워지래스. 똥번이 돼. 가서 주체니. 되는 가서 그 똥니 그거다. 똥니 내내 고방으로 교회 거둘라 최선을 나와 있는 거야. 저게 나와 탐자로 시르고야 레시. 그래서 시외케야. 되네 제도라 나야 믿음 봐. 규모도 찾는 거지. 제도보다 켜봐. 수바체 두만 당송 버스 다 심해 봐서 되기 회디브다 템베 믹데메 딘두기 믹데 타다 식체 매바 다 첼레게 개발 시베사와 몽바 머리고 대 집을 제가 거네 집을 집을 쳐 첼레게 개발 대대비 체중 만든 게 동반이디 다공스
Next, we move to stanza 46. All the above stanzas, there are explanations to reject the positions of Bhaskara, Sutrantika, and Chittamatra. And then stanza 46, which reads, devoid of characteristics and origination, devoid of substantive reality and transcending speech, space, awakening mind and enlightenment possess the characteristics of non-duality. This explains the emptiness, the ultimate reality, according to the Middle Way school of thought. And then, next, if we go to stanza 48, therefore, constantly meditate on this emptiness, the basis of all phenomena, tranquil and illusion-like, groundless and destroyer of cyclic existence. This explains the 5 characteristics of emptiness, the 5 characteristics or the attributes of emptiness. First one, which says that, therefore constantly meditate on this emptiness, the basis of all phenomena. The basis of all phenomena forms the first characteristic. It says that the emptiness, the ultimate reality, the emptiness, is in fact the basis from which all other conventional realities as samsara and nirvana, they come about. So this is the very building blocks, or this is the foundation from which everything arises. The first characteristics.
다운 디제스가 아주 자우시고 나라리야 가서 심생 디신이라 디시비 디신이 집어레스 코어라시기 뭐 주버디 코어라시니 뭐 주버레 냥데라시니 뭐 주버레스 코어라시니 뭐 주버 셰버디 런신 냥데레스 두수
As explanation of the first characteristic, Nagarjuna again says in the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, he says that the very ultimate nature of sentient beings and the ultimate nature of the Buddha, these two are just the same. There's no difference on the ultimate sense. So then he further says that whosoever understands the ultimate nature of the sentient beings, that is the natural nirvana. And then the second characteristic says tranquil or pacification.
난데 자우시로기 최저 그들의 땡중 저배 타게도 차와서 숨겨야래. 저바 탐지 저바 니시 사티기 디숨겨야래. 다가는 신기 안다 가사 전부 체중 안 돼서 로도스에 거버려 되네. 전부 체중 안 돼. 저번 놈이 지승지. 그냥 또 다른 분도 아예 오차마소.
And then with the second characteristic, that is tranquil or pacification. Emptiness is described as tranquil and in a state of pacification. Because emptiness, in the actual experience of emptiness, all elaborations cease. You have to experience emptiness in the context of the tranquility or the pacification of all elaborations. And the elaborations should be understood in the context of the conventionalities, the conventional existing things. And again, Nagarjuna says in the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, he describes emptiness in the context of that state devoid of the 8 forms of elaborations, like reduction, cessation, oneness, distinctness, and so forth. And the third characteristic of emptiness is illusion-like nature. For
That
some,
is the Tuma Rujik Tuma Shajari. Belgian edition, and 5 fingers. 5 finger is on Shabina, and Zuchung, and Tajung, and Sinla, Kumu, Zumu, Tabonsini. So more is your. Tinga law, Zumu Jik Dotwa. That didn't see any Tuma. Rujik Tumas level is Tumas level is that Rujik Tuma Rujis level, Tumas level is an Chejan Mene Shang. Chejan Mene Shang is an Chejan Ta Mata Sanda Nye, the Nasoshua. Chejan Digi, Judan Kaleslana, Tamjalo, 20 minutes to Meva, Mingde Shaksam Ji, Chikba in the Zane, Mingde Shaksam. 20년에 주변 땅의 정신은 최전의 탐자로 로직거렸어. 로직스는 찍이게 좀 말해. 정신 찍어버렸어. 상황을 잡아서 왔다. 찍어라 그랬어. 봐. 정신 찍어. 자, 인도 추인 로직버 텔레 넘버 나서 샤리르잖아요. 로직 도말 샤다. 로직버 도말 찍 도말 샤라서 말했다. 로직버 도말 샤. 로치고 로투면나 말샤다. 로투면을 여대버디 텐지 내루디 정신이 동에 로치도 주다. 다 그나 분배 딱도 제도 부모를 신이 못 주거든요. 까에 딱도 전에 까를 신이 못 주거든요. 강사가 딱도 전에 강사를 신이 못 주고. 냥대 그런 시절이니 냥대를 신이 못 주고. 코에 정시자위니 코를 신이 주고 동 로치고. 단 낭쇼원에 마다베 코 탁베 냥데 다 신상년 참도가. 그래서 어디 시신 세야디 전담 주식 제일전에 로지고. 타제 주식이 나올라 도마.
And again, in relation to this, the second characteristic, that is the tranquil nature of emptiness. It says that there is a very popular expression which says that the multiplicity, around having the same taste, and one taste in the aspect of multiple natures. So this is the popular expression. Another question is, what does it mean by this expression? So the analogy that we can think of is with the hand and the 5 fingers. So the 5 fingers, if you look at each of the fingers, they are distinct from one another. So we have the small finger, the index finger, ring finger, the middle finger, and the thumb. However, all these 5 different sized fingers, they have the same nature of being fingers. So being fingers is, from that perspective, we can view all these 5 as of the same thing. But if you look at the different sizes and colors and so forth, then we have to decide these 5 as distinct. So the same 5 fingers, from the point of view of being fingers, these all are just one. But from the point of view of their own distinct natures, we have 5 distinct things. In a like manner, if you try to think about all phenomena existing phenomena as the vase, the pillar, the person, nirvana, samsara, we see that they are all distinct. They are all separate from one another. But if you analyze well, we see a commonality. We see a sense of some common thing there of all these different things. So what is that common thing? The common thing is in terms of the mode of existence. When you analyze as to how all these things exist, then we see that none of these exist objectively. None of these exist independently. This means they all share the same nature of lacking independent existence. So this absence of independent existence is the very nature of every phenomena, whether it is a pillar, vase, person, samsara, nirvana. So they have the same nature. So from the point of view of the ultimate analysis, we see that nothing exists on that level. So they share that nature. But from the point of view of the perception, we perceive all these things distinct from one another. So on the perception level, these are all different. They have all different natures. But on the ultimate nature, they all share the same nature. They just share the nature of the lacking independent existence. So as such, we see that from the point of view of the ultimate perception, they are all just of the same taste in the context of lacking independent existence. But on the conventional sense, they all assume their own distinct natures. And next is the third characteristic of emptiness, that is illusion-like nature. So what it means is that somebody who has a true understanding of emptiness, when he is immersed in the understanding of emptiness, he would have total immersion or total understanding of the mere absence of emptiness. However, when a person arises from the meditative state, and then when she starts having all the different perceptions, then we see that the person will realize as to how all these things that are being perceived, they are illusion-like nature, because they don't exist the way they appear. They appear to exist inherently, and that person is well aware of the fact that they don't truly exist that way. As such, they are all illusion-like. So emptiness is described as illusion-like.
I think the Lala of the Nasya, the Kado,
So the easier way to understand this illusion-like nature of emptiness, first is just examine, analyze as to where this self is, where you are.
When we, such a person, hold such a person, then immediately his or her body appears. For oneself also the I, firstly appears my body, and then with help of appearance of the body, then feeling of I. So that moment you feel I, also something can be identified, like my finger or like my hand, my body we can identify. Similarly, I almost
something pointable.
But then further look or examine where is real I? In body is concerned, from top to foot, toes. No, every part of the body cannot identify as a self. Then mind. Yes, there is more possibility. I somewhere among the mind. Then we have to further investigate eye consciousness, the sensorial consciousness, or the mind, awakening state of mind. If that one of the mind among the mind of awakening state, then at the time of dream, no longer that awakening state of mind. Still I is there, I am dreaming. I had dream, isn't it? We can say that. So at the state of dreaming, one of the mind at that moment, then if that case, the deep sleep without dream, still I there, and further goes faint, no breath, no breath. Still we can say, I faint. And other person also, other people also can describe that person or faint. Still I there, still self there. So like that, according Mahanudra Yoga Tantrayana, then at the time of death, there are 8 stages.
Stages.
Eight stages. Process of death, dying, process of dying, like that. The grosser level mind, then dissolves.
Dissolving.
First, those solid element, then liquid element, then heat element, then element of lungs, yok.
Air element.
Air or
wind.
I don't know, wind or I don't know, some energy. So go like that. So then mind. Mind also is at different levels. Then further, deeper. And when the energy, the element of solid element, you see, dissolve, then some indication on the body coming, then liquid reduce, the eyes or these also become dry like that, then energy cease, breathing stop. Then further dissolve, stage of dissolution. Certainly, all the sensitive organs gone. Then after, because the breath stop, then soon they're going to heartbeat or the circulation of blood in the brain also cease. So clinically dead. But still further because of the stage, at least 4 stages. So sometimes now that's because of the occasionally it happens. Some practitioner after their death, after
they're clinically declared dead,
at the time of dying, the body remain sometimes 2-3 weeks fresh. So I was told, you see, of course in India, I think at least the last, 40 years, at a number of occasions, some, including my own senior tutor, 13 days, that state. He remained 13 days. So the body's fresh, no smell. Even you see, sometimes at the time of dying, before death, you see, because of illness, you see, person become very weak, but they
at that stage,
at that stage, then body become more fresh. So last year, no, not last year, I think beginning of this year, one Lama in our settlement, usually his body is very weak, very sick person, but after death, after clinically death, you see his body become very fresh and remain, I think, few days remain like that. So that we explain the subtle mind still there in that body. So ultimately, if among mind there is I, then that mind should be I. Then vese ga mandujuru and ta ga ta mandujuru shima.
Even if you are to point to this subtle mind, technically known as the subtle, innate, clear-like mind, if you point to that as the self, but that mind can be is something which can come in the manifest state and which can cease. However, the self is not something that can come into being and will cease. So as such, the subtle mind as well cannot be pointed to as the self.
So to such analyze or analytical meditation, then very difficult, impossible to identify among the mind as I, self. Now, beside body and mind, no other element. So that's the way, you see, to conclude, there is no independent self. And within the body and mind also you cannot find. Then finally, there's no other alternative way, except the conclusion is just mere designation on the combination of body and mind. So that's the way, make a conclusion. There is no independent I or self. But usually, to us, I appears as a identifiable.
Something identifiable or independent.
So that 대기는 진짜 자주 전에 나 매번 타 쳐윤데 다 나 지들 나오는 시 민두 삼시하고 그러고 다 중도들이.
So here then, through the analysis as set forth earlier, if you when you realize that although the self does appear to exist so objectively, so independently from the object's side, but in true sense it does not exist that way. It is not at all findable over there. Then, because of that very strong conviction that there is no independently existing self, then when the self does appear to exist independently, then you would immediately have understanding that this self is illusion-like, because it does not exist the way it appears. So this is how emptiness is described as illusion-like.
나가르존하게 자식들 자식들 나눠리야 풍부 내신민 달라 때문에 들 때문에 디시고 풍대민 디시고 강신이 디시셔버디 디시베 사미지 풍부도 찍도 야말에 사미지 풍부도 타대도 야말에 전선도 야말에 사미지 풍부도 디시고 편주 땜바이 말에 사미지 풍부 디시고 땜바이 말에 디시고 풍대민래 디시고 풍부도 땜바이 말에 근데 이제 디시고 가야 돼. 소는 신기 다른 유매들도 와. 자, 근데 이제 디시고로 그래. 근데 이제 단디 안다 디나로 우먼주고 나로래야. 남들 기미 강디 지더불 예지 내절 밴디 예 미니 대디니랑 다들 타녀도 다 자니 많이 그러다. 다 타녀도 다디 다들 자니 니주에 있는 자네 타녀도야 다디 민야 다유성 이모지 샤고 거다. 된저대 타녀 주수 다 매베 된디 디셰무리 대디니랑 달아주게. 와 남들 김이 강디 지도부 예지 내절 밴디 예 미니사리 타녀도 나고 니주에 들어다. 다 타녀도 많이 주면 대디 니랑다 대 랑시지 가로다 전답을 못 주거든. 랑시지 못 주거든. 디셰인 그래서 대디 니랑 달라 주교에 사티. 온주.
And then Nagarjuna, again in his text, Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, he did the same kind of analysis in relation to the Tathagata or the Buddha. He says that where is the Buddha? Because the Buddha does not exist objectively or independently. Because if the Buddha does exist objectively or independently, then it should either exist as one with the aggregates or parts of the Buddha, or it should exist as distinct from the parts of the Buddha, and the parts and the aggregates of the Buddha, or the Buddha should be independently dependent on the aggregates, or the aggregates should independently dependent on the Buddha. And the Buddha it should also be the case that the Buddha should possess the aggregates independently. So since that none of these five statements hold true, because the Buddha is not one with the aggregates, no distinct, no independently dependent on the aggregates, no vice versa, and no the Buddha is in possession independently in possession of the aggregates. As such, the Buddha is not something findable objectively or independently. So then where is the Buddha then? So this is the analysis that Nagarjuna undertook. And then now the question is, when the Buddha is unable to be posited objectively or independently from his own side, then what is the Buddha? So in that case, Chandrakirti in his text, supplement to the middle way, he says that after undertaking the 7 modes of analysis, and then the yogi is unable to find the self. So because the yogi is unable to find the self in these 7 different modes, this is an indication that the self does not exist independently or inherently.
The and the 7 said, Ding of the Kalia, Yip Dami, Soba Dami.
So then here, one may wonder as to why Nagarjuna undertook only 5 modes of analysis and Chandrakirti did 7 modes of analysis. So the reason is, rather the difference is in terms of the Chandrakirti adding 2 more to the already existing 5 analysis done by Nagarjuna. So these the 2 additional analyses are the very concrete, the collection of the aggregates is not the self, and the very shape of the aggregates is not the self. These 2 are the additional analyses added by Chandrakirti.
Tadana Nandra Nayundi, Tanjingani, that today in the Domdi, that using when a mother do, Yeni or Penny or that using Tanya on the image.
So now, whether in terms of the 5 modes of analysis or 7 modes of analysis, we see that the self or the Tathagata is not findable objectively, not findable from its own side. So if something does not exist from its own side, so now what is the mode of the existence of that thing? We cannot denigrate, we cannot deny the existence of that thing altogether. So since that thing should exist, but since it does not exist objectively, now how does it exist? What is the mode of existence of that thing then? So then the only alternative left with us is to say that things exist by subjective imputation, subjective designation, not by objective existence from its own side.
Yeah, any Kasa, Gibusami Chumay, Memilungi, Nangamin, Namshimay, Gumin, Teleshan, Gibukam. Gibukam to Dubichir, Yanda Mai. Now soon they are digging, come to Dubal, Dane, that day, Umajugana, Sartani, Tenny Tom, Jigendo, number Dungi, Drup Jul, Me, Gi. Namje, Mebar, Jigde, Nilin, Dil, Rangayana, Dane, Dog. That's abstraction.
And then again, the same kind of analysis is being done in Nagarjuna's precious garland, Ratnavadi, where he says that analyze the self, the very different components as the earth element, water element, fire element, and wind element, and the space, the consciousness. None of these aggregates is the self. And as such, where is the self then? And then in the second stanza, he says that since the self comes into being by virtue of the congregation of these 6 elements, each of these 6 elements themselves lack independent existence because they are also composed of their own respective constituents. And then to make it still clearer, Chandrakirti in his supplement to the middle way, he says that this self, both in the ultimate, in the conventional sense, the self is not findable through analysis. As such, it is only by virtue of dependence on the aggregates that the self comes into being through designation on the combination, through designation on the basis of the designative objects like the 6 elements.
So Buddha Polita, Buddha Palita, Uluru, Kiru Devetari, Buddha Palita, or Kongi, Tashu Java, Buddha Palita Nalaria, Mobo, one you do is Yana, Mobo Tundi, one you do a Dalai Lama, love shall do was, could ten shawan do was.
And then also Buddha Palita, one of the eldest students of Nagarjuna, in his text, the text is named after the author, the text Buddha Palita. It says that if something exists objectively, if something exists from its own side, then this can be posited. We can point to that object objectively over there. We can say that, oh, this is it. And what is the point in its existence by virtue of dependence? In other words, it means that if something exists objectively, then there's no need for claiming that it exists by virtue of dependence on other things.
It's like you must lose and never marvel to your.
So when we speak about something as illusion-like, the illusion, for example, is not something non-existent. It does exist.
So that day, the Matemigas and almost that tiny cells.
When we say
Madhyamika,
when we say Madhyamika or the middle way, it should fulfill the characteristic of being freed from the two kinds of extremes, the extreme of nihilism and the extreme of eternalism.
The nihilism said that then
and this extreme of nihilism is that kind of extreme which believes that nothing exists.
The
and the extreme of eternalism is the one which believes that things exist objectively or independently.
Then Tani Jerusalem, then Taj, then Taki, Takos to Yochi. Then is the Rawang Master.
And whereas when we say something exists by virtue of mere designation, so here designation has the connotation of something existing. Designation has the connotation of something existing, and the dependence, something coming to being by virtue of designation and dependence. And here dependence has a connotation of absence of independent existence.
Dependent arising, arising setting dependent setting, then
so here again the technical word is pratit samutpat. In English would be dependent origination, dependent arising. So here arising has the connotation of something existing. When something exists, when something arises, it should this frees us from falling to the extreme of nihilism, because it does exist. And whereas when we say it exists by virtue of dependence, dependent origination or dependent arising, it has a connotation of dependence. When it says something depends on something, it indicates the absence of independent nature. So this helps us free from the extreme of eternalism, extreme of holding to objective reality.
자상 나가르주는 자쇼 나로리야. 땡진 레버는 중앙 강 되는 동반이 셔스. 되는 때는 다고디 진용면.
Again, this is clearly pictured in Nagarjuna's text, The Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, which says that in chapter 24, which says
that's the main chapter out of 27 chapters.
It says that everything which comes into being by virtue of dependent origination, this indicates the emptiness nature of that thing. And this is further indication that things exist by virtue of mere designation. This is the middle way.
Then again, I think the egoism, from the Buddhist viewpoint, there are negative ego or positive ego. Negative ego is the too much self-centered ego. Then you see no hesitation to harm other, to exploit on other. That kind of ego, feeling of strong self, is negative. But meantime, infinite altruism. You have such sort of courage to suppress the feeling of self-centered feeling. So unless you have strong sense, unless you have sense of strong self, very difficult to practice that. So the Bodhisattvas who really dedicate whole their body, speech, mind to entire sentient being up to Tamil. Infinitely. So there are such a determination. So there are very strong self there. So therefore, not only just ego, self of feeling I, something important, importance of I, but also it's very solid, strong.
So it is a very strong sense of I, which will give you the whole sense of courage, whole sense of strength to work for the welfare of other beings.
And also self-cherishing. Self-cherishing itself, if go extreme, then mistake. But basically, taking care of oneself is logical. And the person who have respect oneself and cherishing oneself, that person can extend that spirit to other, eventually to infinite, to entire sentient being. So self-hatred, impossible to develop genuine sense of care of other. Very difficult. So therefore, sometimes I jokingly telling my audience that the Bodhisattva who really cherishing other more important than oneself is actually very selfish. And that selfish is wise selfish. Poor or ordinary people think just oneself and take care maximum and don't care others. That's actually foolish selfish. Take care more other. You get maximum benefit. Forget about other and think oneself, actually you suffer. And the feeling of loneliness, just think oneself, then eventually look right side, you cannot trust. No one you can trust. This side also, you cannot trust, right? Here also, you see, suspicion, doubt. And behind even more mystery, behind what is going on there. So that kind of a feeling, of course, isn't it? So then finally, you always remain tense. Doubt, insecurity. Open mind, more compassionate mind. Here, friend, here, friend, here, friend. Of course. So the best way to get maximum benefit to oneself is taking care of others. So compassion, I think double work. Taking care, helping others, actually maximum benefit. Right. And also, according to my own experience, now you know, the little experience, when they usually when whoever I met, you see, even on the street and passing through, and I usually just smile. So I express some kind of friendly attitude, smile. So that's act of compassion. But that compassion For myself, I feel easy way. Ease the way. Ease the way. Ease. Comfortable. Smile. Like that. But that not necessarily brings some happiness to other person. Because, sometimes when I smile, then the others respond, why? Why this person, without knowing, they're smiling at me? Oh, what kind of motivation? Oh, that kind of attitude. So it's my smile, my compassionate act, bring more suspicion on that person. Isn't it? So it's the practice of compassion, not necessarily benefit to other, but certainly benefit to myself. So I think that's important. Sometimes we got the impression practice of compassion is something good for other, but for oneself, not necessarily something useful. I think that's a mistake. That's the shimeva said, and the dar, second zone, dan, this, migde chasmidua. Migde shimeva.
So here, the next character, the fourth characteristic of emptiness, the last line of stanza 48, which says groundless. Emptiness has to be understood in the context of being groundless, because when we try to analyze what the object is, through critical analysis, we see that nothing is pointable, nothing is objectively there. There's no basis over there as something to be touched, something to be pointed to. So that indicates that the emptiness has to be understood in the context of being groundless. And then emptiness is also described in the context of being destroyer of cyclic existence. This is what I've already explained earlier. So then it says, so in the Tibetan version, the first line comes the last, which says, therefore constantly meditate on this emptiness, which is there in the English version first. Then we go to read stanza 66. The non-origination of all phenomena is clearly taught to be emptiness. In brief, the five aggregates are denoted by the expression of phenomena. When the ultimate truth is explained as it is, the conventional is not obstructed. Independent of the conventional, no ultimate truth can be found. These stanzas explain the concept of dependent origination in the context of 12 links of dependent origination. Dependent origination pertaining to the external and the internal worlds. And then it says that these basically, we have the two concepts, dependent origination on the one hand and the emptiness on the other. So these two should not be thought of as contradictory. Rather, these two are complementary, or they are the two sides of the same coin. Because as the text says, when the ultimate truth is explained as it is, the conventional is not obstructed. Independent of the conventional, no ultimate truth can be found. What it means is that when I think about the ultimate reality, the emptiness in relation to whatever object that you can think of, in order to really get the understanding of emptiness, you must think of that in relation to some object. Because first of all, we need to have the object, particular object, and then we undertake analysis or examination on that. And through that examination, we'll realize that there is no objectively, or there is no independent entity existing there. So that very understanding, that very nature, the emptiness of the independent existence. On that very particular object is the emptiness. And then on the conventional level, we still see that that object is functioning. So that aspect of the functioning of the object is the conventional truth. So we see that the same object can be viewed in two ways. One in the aspect of the emptiness nature, and the other in the aspect of the dependent origination nature. So these two natures, or the modes, dependent origination and the emptiness, these two are of the same entity, of the same nature, but described as two different things through nominal usage, or through the vernacular, or through the nominal usage here.
Although Four Noble Truth, that concept, all Buddhists believe that or accepted that. But then, in order to understand Four Noble Truth precisely, then you have to rely on the explanation about Four Noble Truth in Madhyamika text. Although, for example, the Dharmakirti's text, Pramana Vadika Karika, or the Digna and the Dharmakirti, they like, I think, the great logician, like a pillar, because the pillar of Buddhist logic. So the Dharmakirti, in second chapter, now he mentioned about Four Noble Truths, a possibility to achieve Buddha, Nirvana and Buddha, and with that he explained about the Four Noble Truths. But still, because that text view about Shunya is according to Chitta Mantra, not Madhyamika. Therefore, his explanation is from the viewpoint of Madhyamika philosophy, then not very convincing. So the best explanation about the Four Noble Truths in Chandrakirti's commentary about the Madhyamika Mulakarika commentary.
Prasanapata, the clear words.
Mm-hmm. They are at best sort of explanation, the most profound and precise sort of explanation about the Four Noble Truths. So just I wanted to say, therefore, in order to explain Four Noble Truths, firstly, you should make you should understand true truth. Just mentioned here, true truth. So true truth means, again, you see, true truth, even non-Buddhists also, you see, have the concept of true truth. Now, within the Buddhist, the four school of thought, everyone, you see, accept the true truth. But meaning of true truth, according to Madhyamika, under this one there. So here, the conventional truth means interdependency, interdependent origin.
Dependent origination.
Dependent origination. The ultimate truth, emptiness or absence of independent existence. So therefore, because absence of independent existence, so naturally it depends on other. So that, therefore, it is possibility, because possibility, therefore, result depend on cause, its own causes, because it dependent. because it's the absence of independent existence. That did the share. Rimbasum Spena, the tension of one side, you take Dinju Chicha. Chashar to be Dinju Chicha, Takshil to be Dinju Chicha, Dinjusum.
So here, to understand dependent origination nature, we should know that there are three levels of dependent origination. First one, dependent origination by means of dependence on causes and conditions. First, and second.
That all Buddhists accept that. Then second.
And second is dependent origination by means of dependence on parts.
That's only Madhyamika accept that. Then within Madhyamika, the Prasangika Madhyamika, nothing.
And the third one is the dependent origination by means of dependence on the basis of designation. So this is what is exclusively accepted by the Prasangika Buddhist philosophers. The reason why the third kind of dependent origination is accepted only by Prasangika is that when you say things arise by means of dependence on the basis of designation, it gives you the connotation that the very basis of designation is by no means that very object which is to be designated. Now the question is, what does it really mean by designating on the basis of the designation? So this clearly indicates that it's only the name, there's nothing objective. Now the question is it only the name? Isn't there anything, any object of reference of these different names and nominations? It doesn't mean that either. Because we surely need to have those objects of reference of these different names and designations. But if these objects, which form the reference of these names, if we analyze whether or not these objects they exist objectively or independently, then we see that they are not pointable as independent of nature. As such, we have the only conclusion that we can draw is that these things exist by virtue of mere designation, as opposed to objective independent existence. Because of the feasibility of the third kind of dependent origination, which means that things they arise by means of dependent origination by depending on the basis of designation. So this clearly indicates that that things arise by means of dependence on parts as well. As such, we see that things don't truly exist from their own side, but rather by means of designation. So as such, we see that things they come into being is by virtue of dependence on other factors. As such, the causality, the causation is also possible, because causation has the implication that the results they come into being by virtue of their causes, by dependence on their causes.
It
is because of this that Nagarjuna, in his fundamental wisdom of the middle way, he summarized everything by saying that where there is the feasibility of emptiness, everything can be feasible, and where there is no feasibility of emptiness, nothing can be feasible.
The response rate, Samzambe, Mumao, Ranshimana, Kaya take money, since Su Zalok, Umochira, Chadaris, Su Goshavatala, Ludu Palandium.
This is very true lines. This particular stanza, Nagarjuna said, is in fact a stanza as a response to the argument put forth by Chitmatras and the lower schools against the middle way school, which says that if things don't exist independently, then they shouldn't. Then you cannot posit the existence of anything. So against that, as a response to this, and thereby the lower schools, they were kind of criticizing the Madhyamikas, saying that, oh, you are in fact nihilists. You don't accept anything because you accept everything to be mere designation. Nothing exists from their own side. This, which indicates that nothing, which you mean to say that nothing is existing. This means you, the Madhyamikas, fall into the extreme of nihilism.
Even Arya Sangha, the main propagator of Chittamantra philosophy. So you see, in one of his comments, now he described Madhyamika school of thought is nihilism, like that.